Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Character Clinic. I'm Haley,
I'm Carla.
and we are licensed therapists here to talk about our favorite, most relatable fictional characters and ways that we might work with them.
I'm really excited for today's episode. We are going to be doing Parks and Rec today. How are you feeling about it, Haley?
I'm so excited. This is definitely a favorite show of mine. I've seen the whole thing all the way through multiple times. Love anything by Michael Schur, basically. So, how much of a fan are you of Parks and Rec?
I really like the show. I haven't watched it all the way through, but what I have watched, I've really loved.
That makes total sense. I think one thing that's really exciting every time we only cover the beginning, like the first season of a TV show or the first book of a series, for instance, that is just even more exciting. That maybe later on we could do a second follow up episode to it where we recap after some character development, which is really fun. I think we'll have a lot of opportunities to potentially explore those in the future. And we decided, just for everybody's reference, that for today, we were going to focus on a specific episode of Parks and Rec in season 1, episode 5, The Banquet. And so that is where this character is mentally at the time they come in for their intake for today.
I'm going to be the counselor and Haley's going to be the client. The structure of the episodes is that we do an intake with the character. An intake is that first session that you do with a new client to figure out why they're in therapy, what they're looking to work on. So we do a role play of an intake, and then after the role play, we reveal who the character is and we discuss how we as counselors would work with them based on that initial intake.
We like to imagine exactly how it would go when they are introduced to the concept of therapy. And then we spend most of the time talking about, okay, what are our impressions? Where do we go from here? How would we work with this person? And there's a lot of room to explore after that.
Yeah. So if you relate to any of the characters that we talk about, it's really important to remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy and that every single person is different. So while you might relate to one of the characters that we talk about and think, oh, those are some of the issues that I'm struggling with, that is something that might be helpful for me too. We would want to encourage you to potentially explore some therapy options. We want to destigmatize seeking therapy. And so it'd be really important, and we would want to encourage you to think about seeking therapy for yourself if you notice that you relate to some of the issues that our fictional clients are struggling with. All right. Before we get started, do you have any highlights for the past week, past couple weeks? Anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I've just started official EMDR training, which is, if you're unfamiliar, a newish treatment modality specifically for working with trauma. And I am really looking forward to being able to learn everything about that and applying that to my sessions. How about yourself?
Yeah, that's really exciting, especially just for the population that you work with. I imagine that a lot of them, if not most of them, have experienced or potentially may have experienced trauma in the past, and so um, I think that that will be a great addition to your skill set. This past weekend, I started a training. It's a mindfulness training. I already know quite a bit about mindfulness as a counselor, just from my modalities. I use dialectical behavior therapy and something called acceptance and commitment therapy, and both of them use mindfulness as a concept a lot in therapy. But I'm really excited to learn mindfulness as its own individual concept and how I can apply it to therapy with my clients. Um, just because mindfulness is really helpful for OCD and anxiety. And I really like mindfulness and meditation for myself anyway. So I'm looking forward to using it with my clients.
Yeah, that's one of the really fun things about this field is the concept and the understandings of how people work and what affects people and what can or might not be very helpful to people is always changing. Our understanding of those things is always
Mhm.
fluctuating. And so there's always more to learn and more to put into practice. And so it's kind of fun that we never leave the period of learning and getting new information about it.
Yeah, well, we don't have to. We can, but it doesn't mean that we have to. I think both of us really value growth and learning in the field and in general. Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started with our intake. What brings you into counseling today?
Hi. Yeah. So I have a binder of all the things that we're going to be working on, the things that I'm going to be tackling here, and then you're going to help me with. And it's going to be this is going to go so well. It's going to be great. So the first thing on my list is I recognize that some people have some different way of doing things that might not really be my preferred way,
Mhm,
and I know that that's fine. So I guess I'd just like to know maybe if there's ways that I can be more okay with that.
mhm.
Um, because sometimes it just makes me want to climb the freaking walls. And I'm going to get better at that. I know that I can and I know that I will. So we're just talk about that a little bit. And other than that, I mean, I am just like I am on top of things. I know that I can
Mhm.
handle anything that I need to handle. You know what's also hard for me though is dating. That has been um anytime that you got to rely on other people to bring to the table the same level of preparedness that you have, um, that's where things get a little hard. So maybe people in general is something that, I love people and I'm good at working with them, but I guess just wondering what kind of skills and ideas that you have about, you know, how to handle when people don't follow the script.
Yeah, so, it sounds like you've got even therapy figured out, like, you have the list of things that you're wanting to work on in here.
Oh, I do. I have a whole binder. I spent weeks carefully planning this out. I picked you out of a large selection of people. I know exactly what we'd like to focus on here. I have read that you have focused on some mindfulness techniques. I would like to know what those are.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if you're okay with it, I would like for us to just take a little bit of a step back, because and I will definitely get to those mindfulness skills for sure, but also I'd like to learn a little bit more about you in this moment. You asked me about some mindfulness skills, and I would definitely love to get to those. I think that based on your intake documents, and then based on some of the things that you mentioned, that those could potentially be things that are helpful for us to work on some good coping skills. And I'd like to take a little bit of a step back and just learn a little bit more about you. So, can you tell me a little bit more about you mentioned your coworkers. Can you tell me a little bit more about work?
Well, I work for the government. I
Mhm.
work for the government in the greatest city in the world, and it is the best job that exists. And I get to spend all my time helping people and making our incredible city even more incredible. And I just, this binder that you're looking at, I have a million of these things for every different big goal that I have at work. And I would spend all day, every day there if I could. I would spend all of my time at that office or out in the parks. I would all of my time should be spent there. And I just know that I am so good at what I do, and I just cannot wait to keep doing it.
Yeah, you really love your job, and I can hear the confidence in knowing that I'm great at this. And also your dedication. It sounds like you're very proud of working for the city and of what you do.
Thank you so much for saying that. I don't know that anyone has said that to me before. And it just feels really, really nice for my work to be recognized. Um, I don't know that that's ever really happened before. So thank you so much. I'm a little shocked. I never
Yeah.
feel like I'm doing enough.
Okay, can you tell me more about not feeling like you're doing enough?
Well, I mean, I put in all this work and I organize all these public forums to get the people's input in what we can do to help them even more. And then they come up and it's never enough. And I'm always disappointing somebody. And then, my boss couldn't care less what I'm doing. My coworkers would rather spend their time like shopping or doing nothing. And I mean, they're great and I love them so much. And they're my favorite people in this whole world. But also, they give me this feeling sometimes that maybe my amount of energy is just a little bit annoying to them, which is hurtful. And then of course there's my mother that is just so far above me in her career trajectory. I would kill to be in the path that she's in. But if you were to ask her, I could never possibly get there. So
Yeah. So you feel like you're never doing enough now and at work, but it also sounds like you feel like you're never doing enough for your mom.
yeah. Well, I mean, I do everything that I can to recognize her work and to celebrate her and to just be good enough for her. And I met with negativity and criticism and dismissiveness and vitriol. And well, it would just be a little nice to have one moment of I'm proud of you from literally anyone ever.
Yeah. So, you know, growing up, it sounds like that with your mom and then also with your coworkers, but really with your mom, you've never really felt validated, or you don't feel very validated. Um, and so it would make sense that when I validated you in here in therapy, that it would come as a shocker, even though to me it seems pretty obvious that you work really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I almost don't believe you when you say it. And it's just, I know that I annoy people. People give off an air of being very annoyed by me, that I'm just too much all the time. And it's been my whole childhood, it's my entire career. It's again in dating. I There's nobody in this world that doesn't find me annoying, loud, and too much. And I can't find any way to lessen that impact and turn that off. And so instead, I just have to lean into it and be like, well, if I'm going to annoy people, might as well like really make it worth it and do stuff for other people so that maybe there's something redeemable that they could find about me.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, that sounds exhausting.
It is. But again, if I spend all my time at the office and it's not like I have anyone to come home to, then maybe one day someone will have a benefit from the work that I do.
Yeah. So, in a lot of ways, you do this work for others, but also it helps to keep you busy.
Yeah. Yeah, it keeps me really busy. I spent all my time thinking about public works and public service and caring for other people. And when I focus on how good it feels to take care of other people, then I don't have to focus on anything else.
Yeah. Don't have to focus on yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing salvaging about my personality. Um, and so might as well just focus on what I can do for other people. If they're not going to like me, I can still do something for them and then maybe they'll at least be happy.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about work? So, can you tell me about your colleagues?
So I have this one particular colleague who shares the office space with me, who very vocally could not care less about his job, about this work. And I mean, he'll listen to me if I tell him we need to do something because technically he works under me, but he definitely would rather be anywhere but there, rather shopping. And um he loves to go shopping and focus on really nice things in life, which is great. And I love that for him. And that's wonderful for him. And then there's another coworker who is very similar. In fact, the two of them are very close friends, and she's wonderful. Will also listen to me if I need to request that she help with something, because technically she works under me, but at the same time would also rather be anywhere but there. And then I do have my boss. I love him, but he is well, he and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and a lot of the work that I'd like to do for other people, he would rather me not do, which
Mm.
is hard. So I do have to go around him quite frequently, and it leads to some kerfuffles. And then I have this one idiot coworker who is just a bumbling mess, and he provides some entertainment, although he's kind of a nightmare to have around. And then there's you know what, there is this intern that we have that I really see some potential in her, and I know that if we work together long enough, I could have a really great influence on her, and maybe one day she'll be like me. She'll be the next me.
Yeah. So it sounds like you know a lot about your coworkers. And you mentioned that there's an intern that you feel like maybe you could mentor, and you specifically said maybe she could be the next me. What do you mean by that? What is the next you? Tell me a little bit more about you.
Well, in my ideal career path, I would continue going upward in politics, um, and just have these incredible positions where I get to do incredible work and help more and more and more people. And I could see if I ever leave this position and move up, then someone would need to fill it. And that person would have, frankly, big shoes to fill. And so maybe she could be that person.
Hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like maybe she's a lot like you.
Well, not yet, but I bet that with some time spent with me, she will come to love it just as much as I do.
Okay. So maybe she doesn't necessarily love it as much as you do yet, but you're hoping that she will.
Yes. I think if we find the angle that works best for her, we can put that into action. There's some part of this that she will love. We just have to find it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So tell me about your social life. What is your social life like outside of work? Friends? Do you have any hobbies?
Um, no. I like to spend time making these binders, and writing out all of the very detailed plans of my next project.
Hmm.
Um, I have tried dating. My mother is uh, I can't think of another word than forceful, but very keen to help me find someone. So I have continued trying to date, even though it's been kind of a series of abject disasters. Um, so there's that.
Yeah. So you mentioned a series of them. Can you tell me a little bit more about those disasters?
Well, I've had people just walk out. I've had people catch on fire in the middle of a date. I've had people showing up with their significant others. Um, I've had a lot of almost laughable levels of chaos in my dating life.
I see. Gosh, somebody almost caught on fire?
Yep.
That's someone came to your date with their significant other?
Yep.
Wow. What do you make of that? What do you make of that pattern?
I make that I am a disaster. I am the common denominator there, and nothing good will ever come of that situation. And it's just is completely hopeless, and I'm seconds away from giving up.
Okay, so you feel like you might be the problem?
I do. I mean, I must be. I must be. It happens so often. I'm the common denominator. It's got to be the case. That's what my mom
Mm,
would say anyway.
okay. So then maybe this isn't necessarily this thought isn't necessarily coming from you. It sounds like it might be you might have heard it from your mom.
Well, I guess that's fair. Yeah. I mean, it certainly comes from her, but I don't disagree.
Mm. How do you feel when you're around your mom?
Anxious, nervous, very on edge, very tripping over myself to try and do anything right to just avoid criticism. I'm not angling for things to go well, just as not terrible as possible. I
Mhm.
love her to death. I respect her more than anyone. I look up to her. I want to be her. I want to have her career path. I want to learn everything from her. Um, it's just that she's a little harsh, so I have to spend a lot of time trying to be good enough. Haven't figured that out yet, though. One day, maybe.
Mhm. Yeah. So, on one hand, she makes you feel really anxious, or you feel really anxious when you're around her. You feel like maybe you're walking on eggshells. And on the other hand, it sounds like you feel like she's a role model for you.
Yeah, yeah, both of those. That's accurate.
Okay. Um, what do you admire about your mom?
Her ambition and her drive and her focus and the respect that she earns from other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you really um appreciate her ambition. And it sounds like you are also very ambitious.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
I have so many goals. When I was in kindergarten, I said that I wanted to be the president. And I still want that. I know that every little kid thinks that at one point. Um, but I still want that. I still want to advance in politics and I still want to make a difference and help people and do everything that I can in public service. And
Mhm.
I still feel exactly as strong about that as I did back then.
So I'm curious, what would you and I imagine that you have some thought out answers for this. What would you like to work on in here? What would you like to gain from counseling?
Well, if we consult my binder again,
Mhm.
um, I really think that I could be better at being there for other people and helping other people more and being more tolerable to other people and being more tolerant of when people are clearly annoyed by me or like not satisfied with me. How can I be like okay with that more?
You want to be more accepting of the fact that other people might find you frustrating or annoying?
Exactly. I want to be more acceptable to other people. Um like and so I need I know that I can't change so much that I'll be likable to other people, but I would like to be okay with the fact that I'm not and continue working as hard as I can to be good for them anyway.
Okay, I think I might have misunderstood the first time. So it sounds like you're wanting more so to change in a way that you can be more tolerable to others.
No, I don't think that's possible. I would like to um, be more tolerant of when I am not acceptable to them and continue working even harder to be more acceptable to them, even though it's they're not going to like me, but I can do more for them.
Okay. So help me understand. So I'm hearing you say that you want to be able to accept that other people will not tolerate you sometimes, but you also want to change to be more tolerable?
Yes, I guess it's come to a I'll take what I can get type of situation.
Okay. Okay. I think I'm understanding what you're saying. So I know we got caught up in that part a little bit. Can you tell me more of some of the other things that you were wanting to gain?
That's the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
Unless that wasn't enough. Is there something else you wanted me to say?
Um, no. I think that was great. Is there something that you think I might want you to say?
Well, yeah, I assume that you have ideas of how this is supposed to go, and I just want to make sure that I'm doing it right. I'm doing it like as good as possible, and that I'm doing a good job. Like, maybe you'll be able to go out and be like, oh, that's my favorite client. I know that's kind of silly, but if I there's something that I can do to do this more right, please let me know.
Yeah. So you'll do whatever you need to get an A in therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do I
Okay.
do that?
Well,
Is that a thing?
um, I think I could see how you would see it that way in that, like, all this time you've been like, go, go, go. If I do a good job, then I will inevitably be doing better. And therapy doesn't work that way. Like maybe something like a job in the government, how that would work. Therapy doesn't really work in that way. Therapy is more so we build a relationship and it's kind of slow and it takes time. And sometimes you learn things about yourself or your past or others, even that you don't necessarily like or that you wouldn't have necessarily thought of. And so I think that maybe as we continue with therapy, you might come to find that some of the goals that I had in the beginning might change. And I just want you to know that that's okay. If that happens, that's okay.
Okay. Well, that's a little scary to me. I'm not sure how I feel about uncertainty or facing difficult emotions or not feeling like I'm able to check off a list that I know that I'm doing a good job. Um, but I'm willing to give it a try.
I'm glad you're willing to give it a try. I know that facing the uncertainty, it can be really scary. I'm curious if you have any other questions for me before we finish today.
Um, yeah, actually, what are your interpretations? Like what do you think about me after learning all this? And what are you writing in your notes? And maybe are you going to put a diagnosis on file? And like just what are the things that you're thinking about me?
You're curious about my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I guess I would like to know, how I come across and um what how that makes you feel.
Yeah, that's important to you. I don't have any initial thoughts, clinical thoughts to share with you other than that I am looking forward to our work together and that I think that we could be a great fit. Um, I I tend to make it a rule to not immediately have a diagnosis that I'm thinking of or to diagnose anyone immediately just because people are people. And what I learned about you today isn't you as a whole. And so I think it'll take a while for me to get to know you. And so I don't have anything specific immediately. Um, but I can say that I think we'd be a good fit and I would love to work with you.
I could take that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you don't have any other questions, then that'll be it for today. Um, anything else before we finish?
I think that's it.
Okay, then that'll be it for today, and I will see you in our next session.
Okay.
Haley, how do you feel like that went?
I felt it went really well. I portrayed everything that I felt like I really needed to for that particular character.
We might as well reveal who the character is. So, who is the character?
Just in case anyone is still unaware, this was Leslie Nope from Parks and Rec, everyone's favorite high strung queen. She
Yeah.
is quite a character, and it's clear if you've seen the rest of the show, she definitely goes through a lot of character development, and so do the other characters, which is wonderful. Part of what makes the show so great in the first place, of course.
Mhm.
But at this point in season 1, episode 5 of her life, there's a lot there. And there's certainly a lot to talk about, a lot that she's struggling with. And it was very, very fun to portray her. But also, I felt we successfully were able to touch on every one of the main things that would be like her presenting concerns in therapy, which was fantastic. There were certain words that you and I might use to describe what she's going through that she did not use. But
Mhm.
that would be part of like the therapist role, is helping her understand what these things are that she's experiencing. Was there any
So
impression that you had as her counselor that might be really relevant to how we're going to plan out for her treatment?
my initial impressions were, whoa, you've come here prepared. You have a list of things that you want to tackle in therapy. And I imagine that other people might have that reaction to Leslie when they meet her.
Yes, I think that is a very fair reaction. That's kind of an example of this countertransference. You're able to harness, this is how she made me feel in that moment. So now I know more about how she makes other people feel in her life. And that's
Mhm.
therapeutically useful information. She's a lot of things that we definitely mentioned. She's very focused. She's very ambitious. She's very high energy, but
Mhm.
also she has a lot of anxiety. I think we can very safely label that. She has a lot of perfectionism. She has a lot of people pleasing tendencies. She is struggling from some patterns of emotional abuse that have happened in her life with her mother, but then she has experienced a lot of feeling unable to be accepted by other people. And
Yeah.
it just continues to build up this desperation that she has to, I've got to be good enough. There's got to be more than I can do. I got to go, go, go. And
Yeah.
some people, when they experience that devastating experience of like rejection or um, disapproval, or people just being very dismissive of them, sometimes they very much internalize it and withdraw into themselves, and other people very much externalize it and focus on like, well, how can I do more for other people? How can I work harder to be good enough? But then I'm always moving the goalposts. It'll never be good enough in my own eyes, even. I think
Mhm.
these are some really common themes that we see with Leslie.
I agree. My thoughts as the counselor during the intake were, oh, she's heard that she's too much from people that know her at work. And then how did she become too much? Well, it could be, at least my thoughts as the counselor were like, well, it sounds like there's something here with mom that she didn't feel like she was enough for mom. And so she ended up trying to do whatever she could, anything she could to impress mom. And then what did that lead to? Maybe her just doing so much that other people could perceive her as like, oh, she's a lot. She's too much.
Yeah, I totally agree. Every aspect of her life has been infiltrated by this self imposed pressure to be good enough for other people and to finally get other people's approval. And to the point that if she's not getting someone's approval, even if she's just perceiving that she's not getting someone's approval, she doesn't look at, okay, well, maybe mine and this person's priorities or values or interests don't line up. Instead, she thinks of it as, I'm doing something wrong, and she doesn't even look at if anyone else is doing something to hurt her. She still looks at it as, I did something to cause that. This is my fault, as opposed to, I don't have to accept that treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. So always trying to figure out how to fit that mold, how to be enough for everybody and anybody.
hmm And I think something that is hard to catch in someone with her tendencies is that because she is actually very successful at work. And as we continue to see, she continues to be successful in her career, but she's very successful. She actually does get a lot of the things that she wants to do done. She does a great job at things, and she's an incredible friend because, of course, she puts everybody else above her. So she is someone that is very, very successful in all the things that she tries, but she doesn't allow herself to perceive that or to recognize that. She still perceives that she's never going to be good enough. Um, and because of the pattern of success that she does have, I've seen a lot of people like this that might not think that there are these really big, deep rooted issues behind this. And they might actually kind of perceive, like, oh, I'm totally fine, except for this couple of things that they might perceive to be very small. So,
Mhm.
for instance, when you ask her about her presenting concerns, and she doesn't say, oh, I really struggle with anxiety and perfectionism and people pleasing. Instead, she says, oh, I need some coping skills to tolerate other people better or to make myself more tolerable. Like, she's looking kind of in the wrong areas
Mhm.
because she has this view, and a lot of people have this view that if I'm doing something well, then there must not be anything wrong with me.
Mhm.
And that doesn't have to be the case. We can be very successful in some areas, and we can just be very good at masking, very good at pushing through the pain, very good at doing things while handling really big, difficult underlying emotions. And just because you're living your life well and still meeting your goals doesn't mean you're not also struggling. And
Yeah.
so I think that explains a lot about why she might have come into a therapy session and not been really forthcoming about a lot of the stuff that you and I see are her main
Mhm.
concerns, because she might not even be aware of them yet.
I agree fully. She sees it as her fault, like, "I'm not enough, I'm not doing enough. If I was doing enough, my mom would recognize me." Um, and so I imagine that she just would have no idea. And so she would just think, "Well, I need to figure out what skills I can use to change myself to being like, how to mold myself into someone that is more tolerable to other people instead of like, oh, this might be stemming from my relationship with my mom, and how do I process that?" That's a lot harder to do, and there's not like a specific goal that you can meet. It takes time. It takes like talking about it. It takes, I mean, you end up having feelings of hurt, like you end up feeling hurt in therapy, and you have to work through it, and it's not as easy.
Yes, I think that's such a great point. The part where you mentioned where you start to feel hurt in therapy, and you mentioned this to her a little bit in the intake of this idea that it you didn't use these you didn't use these exact words, but it's a lot of emotional labor. Sometimes things hurt worse before they get better, and it's because we go through this process of uncovering and learning these things about ourselves that we didn't quite realize might have been. And this isn't for everybody. There are people that are very aware, very self-aware of exactly what's causing their concerns, but there are also a lot of people that are not. And so for her, it could almost be like a self-protective mechanism that she chooses not to see it as other people treating her poorly, and sees it as, well, I deserve all the blame, because in some ways, and I've had this exact conversation with clients sometimes too, is this idea that if you put the blame on yourself, it almost feels better and safer, because then it makes you feel like you had control over it, and it makes you feel like you can change it, you can fix it.
Mhm.
And if you get to a point of accepting, no, I didn't deserve to be treated that way, it wasn't my fault, and I had no control over that, that's a lot scarier to recognize that you don't necessarily feel like you can just easily check off a list and make yourself totally impervious to that kind of hurt in the future. And getting to a
Yeah.
point where you accept, oh, that was harmful to me. It
Mhm.
it's a big revelation sometimes, and it can be
Yeah.
very hurtful to go through, and it's very hard.
Yeah, and I mean, it can even be grief. Like, you
Mhm.
have to process, this is the relationship I thought I had with this person, and it turns out it wasn't like that. And now I have to grieve what I thought this would be and see it for what it is. And that can be really painful. And then a lot of times when you become aware, then you feel like you have to actually do something about it. So maybe set boundaries, or if it's really bad, maybe like not have that person in your life so much. And so that can be hard to face too. And that for some people can take like a lifetime to face.
That's true. Absolutely. It can be just very, very difficult. But at the same time, it does end up on the other side when it's handled successfully. It can be very freeing, very very uplifting to get to a point of I get to decide whether I'm good
Mhm.
enough or not. And I get to decide whether or not I'm treated poorly. And I can have some influence in my life about who's around me, what I hear from other people, what I feel proud of or not, what feels good enough. And it can be really, really life changing.
Yeah. And something I'm hearing from you is um, control, having the recognizing the things that you actually have control over versus the things that you wanted to control that you don't actually have the control over. So for example, I don't have control over how other people perceive me. I don't have control over how other people treat me, but I do have control over what I do about it. I do have control over whether I set boundaries, whether I still have those people in my life, whether I um, change what that relationship looks like. Um, and so what I'm hearing in even in that is that shifting your view of the things that you have control over versus um, trying to force control over things that you have no actual way of changing yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's also something that is hard to accept because in a person like Leslie, she has so clearly convinced herself like this is my lot in life. I'm the one that has to make the existing people in my life like me more. And something that is hard to go through, but still is very true, just because the uncertainty of it, the difficulty of it. I like to remind people that there are 7, almost 8 billion people in this world. And even if it's hypothetically true that every single person currently in your life thinks you're really annoying, there are people out there that will not. There are people out there that will love you and treat you extremely kindly, exactly as you are already. And even if hypothetically it is true, if any one person out there finds you off putting, that does not hinder you from being able to meet new people, interact with other people who will not think of you that way and who will treat
Yeah.
you a lot differently in reaction to that. And so anytime we find ourselves stuck in relationships where we just feel belittled, negative, hurt, betrayed, it just does not have to be like that.
Yeah. At the same time, I do wonder, specifically with Leslie. So we talked about how in the room, the way that you perceive a client could potentially be like a way that they're perceived outside of therapy. So like with Leslie, I was like, whoa, this is a lot. And she is perceived that way. And so one thing that I do wonder is as she does therapy and is able to understand her relationship with her mom and how that affects who she is today, I do wonder if that would change some of the way that she is, and like if she wouldn't have feel like she has to take on this role of like doing so much.
That's an excellent point. That just naturally, as she works on accepting herself, building her own self confidence, and not blaming herself for you know, perceiving that she's not meeting the approval that she needs to, then she would relax a little bit more in terms of working herself or overworking herself to try to meet other people's approval. And then she would be running around doing extra things a lot less. That is a
Mhm.
good point. That could be very well be something that naturally follows that.
I'm curious about your short-term goals with Leslie.
So I would definitely want to just immediately start on positive self-talk, positive affirmations, focusing on building up patterns of internal validation that she's able to tell herself eventually, yes, I know I'm good enough. If you don't like me, that's totally fine because I like me, kind of a thing. So
Mhm.
I'd love to start on that just right away, start really small steps, but just building up some level of inner voice where she's able to start feeling like she can validate herself. What about you? I have some long-term goals I was about to just jump into, but what about you for short-term goals?
For short-term goals, I would want her to start noticing the negative self-talk. I would want to just slowly point out that you've mentioned being too much a lot. Tell me more about that. Who is saying that? I would just want her to notice where that's coming from because and how often she's saying that to herself because sometimes I do think that when we already have that in our mind that we then perceive everyone else to see us that way even if they don't necessarily always fully perceive us that way. And so I would just want her to start to notice like when other people say things like that, but also how often she's saying it to herself. Sometimes I feel like it could be really beneficial to look at just have something that you can look at and be like, oh, I'm telling myself I'm too much this many times, like, I don't know, 10 times a day. And then I hear it from other people like couple times a week. And then you're like, oh, am I telling myself this? And then you can start to work on, well, like, why am I telling myself this all the time? So that would be one short-term goal. And then another short-term goal would actually be that mindfulness that she
Yeah.
was curious about. I would want her to actually try mindfulness in a way where it's not like an active thing. It's more like, I just want you to sit and I just want you to label and notice the thoughts that come up. I would want for her to be able to like take a step back, be an observer of the thoughts that are happening, and then noticing what kinds of thoughts she's having. And then for me in the room, I would want to reframe things for her. When she says something like, I've been doing too much, or other people aren't doing enough, I'd want to reframe that language in a way that she might not even notice that it's happening, but that she could start to see things a little bit differently.
Yeah. As you describe the short-term goal of noticing her thoughts, it reminded me of something that you said to her even in the intake process, where you pointed out that the inner voice that gave her a really negative thought was not her own voice, it was her mother's. And that was a
Mhm.
great way to introduce that idea. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Something that you labeled as a short-term goal is one that I had kind of mentally put in my long-term goal category just because I could see it kind of being a long time for that to sink in for her. The
Mhm.
idea of working on the language and the reframes in the room and
Mhm.
focusing on like a corrective emotional experience of her bringing in what she expects to be too much for other people and for someone to be there with her to say, you're not too much and it is okay for you to bring whatever level of you bring into the room. And you're not bad or wrong or off putting or disturbing to other people just for being who you are. And kind of changing some of the language that she uses to describe herself by reflecting it back to her in a more positive way, exactly like you talked about. And then changing the demonstration of that reaction to her and showing her that you don't have to be seeing yourself in this way, that it is possible for someone to see you in a different way. And
Mhm.
then here, let me guide you through adjusting that for yourself too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for you, a long-term goal would be to help her change the way that she sees being too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Working on her self image, working on, I mean, I mentioned starting on that internal validation. Truthfully, I think because we talked about how she might be for a little while not quite so aware of exactly what it is that are the underlying concerns for her. I perceive
Mhm.
it taking a little bit of time for these to sink in. Remember, I don't quite remember exactly what you said, but it was a positive statement, like
Oh, you're very proud.
something like that. And the response that I gave as Leslie was something along the lines of like, "Yeah, I don't even believe you."
Mhm.
And so I think in those particular cases. Now, that's not everybody who goes through these things,
Mhm.
but when we're dealing with someone who has not a super high level of self awareness regarding her emotional processes, I could see that taking some time for her to be comfortable with. And not that we wouldn't start it ASAP, just
Mhm.
that for her to really come around and start to hear it and believe it for herself.
Mhm.
I could see that being kind of a long-term process.
Yeah, I think that it would also be a long-term process. For me, it would be something that I would start immediately, just a very gentle reframe of some of the things that she thinks might be too much. And then maybe as she starts to gain more awareness, it would increase. And then I would encourage her to reframe things for herself rather than just hearing it from me. Any other long-term goals?
I think we would definitely want to be focusing on her relationships and the way that she interacts with other people. And this would be a great thing to plan out with her in order for her to really feel on the same page in the beginning, because
Mhm.
that's one of the things that she came in specifically mentioning. Um, and so we could frame it in ways that sound really familiar and expected to her. But definitely focusing on her boundary setting, which you
Mhm.
probably knew I was going to go there. Focusing on like her assertiveness skills, focusing on recognizing, oh, this is not the way that I feel comfortable being treated, and how to handle a situation like that. Maybe talk to the person, communicate, and go through conflict resolution, but then also how to give herself that freedom to say, I'm going to walk away from this. Or just like you said earlier, exercise whatever level of boundary and separation from that person that she needs to, or
Mhm.
just correct it in the moment. So, working on interacting with other people in a way that feels a lot more balanced interpersonally,
Mhm.
so that she's not just giving of herself so freely and not receiving anything in return. I think this would definitely come more easily after we're doing the things that we've already talked about, building up that internal validation, those kinds of things.
I like that long-term goals would be some of those boundary phrases and boundary setting. For me, I might maybe a few sessions in, maybe like 5, 6 sessions in, I might encourage setting a boundary and then the next session asking her how that felt. I imagine that it wouldn't feel so good, that it would feel icky, that it would feel like uncomfortable. And maybe she might even come and be like, I tried to do it and I couldn't, I just couldn't do it. And so then I would ask, like, when else have you felt that way? Maybe with your mom. That was a little long winded, but a long term goal for me would be processing her relationship with her mom. It really seems like a lot of things stem from her relationship with her mom, feeling like she's never good enough for her. I imagine that she felt like that as a kid, and clearly it seems like she still feels that way now. So I'd want to slowly work on that, build her awareness of how she feels when she's around her mom, that she doesn't have to feel that way, or she doesn't have to put herself in situations where she would feel that way. And then pretty long term would be setting boundaries with her mom when she feels like she can.
Yes, absolutely. Um, I totally agree with everything you said about the setting boundaries and how difficult that can be. Anytime I cover boundary phrases with a client, I will sit there and help them come up with ones to use given like specific circumstances of their lives. But then we always have to have a debrief after we come up with ideas. And like I might be writing them down on my notepad. And I'm going to hand over the list and be like, now, do these sound doable? It's one thing for them to
Mhm.
sound good and for you to like them and for you to be like, "Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
imagine that. Wouldn't that be amazing?" But it's another thing entirely to feel like, "I could say this."
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of the time, it's really hard, and it's not just simply whether or not you have the words, but the confidence in the intention behind them.
Okay, so we've got our short-term goals, our long-term goals. Is there anything else that you think is important, that we talk about in regards to Leslie?
I think we nailed it. I think one thing that I would say is that just in general, this is kind of the exact client that I focus on, that I see a lot of somebody that is in recovery, whether she is at that place in her own mind or not, from some abusive patterns. Could be emotional, could be physical, could be of any kind, but she's got some deep attachment wounds. And she is in a process where she is trying to work through people pleasing tendencies, working on her own self confidence, assertiveness, boundary setting. She's become this perfectionist. She has a lot of social anxiety. This is kind of a lot of what I focus on, all wrapped up into one person. So it's very
Mhm.
fun to do this episode and to focus on Leslie. And I thought we had a lot of really great things that I would really like for all of my clients to know and for people to know in general about these concepts. So I'm really excited that we got to talk about them.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like this is the type of client that you work with a lot. Leslie is a type of client that I would see in my office, in that they would see that I'm an OCD and anxiety that I'm an anxiety specialist, and they might be like, "Oh yeah, like I'm a little high strung. I think that this is something that I could benefit from, and maybe she'll teach me some coping skills and whatnot." But then as we go in deeper, realize that, oh, this is coming from a very deep place. And so this is also the type of client that I work with a lot, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
And I think she'd come in at, like we talked about, with her particular presentation. She would
Mhm.
come in looking for like an anxiety specialist because that would be the end all be all of what she thought she might need help with, is some pretty
Mhm.
basic coping skills, that kind of a thing. So I think that makes
Yeah.
total sense that she would seek you out as her counselor.
Yeah, so that's about it for our episode today. Is there anything that we want to plug?
I think, as usual, we might want to plug our socials. Our podcast can be found on any podcast streaming service, plus YouTube. We're Character Clinic Podcast, or just Character Clinic. On TikTok and Instagram, you can find us at Character Clinic Pod. Sometimes we'll post little snippets, little clips. Occasionally, we might come on ourselves and post a little extra insight into what was going through our minds while we were recording some of these. Carla, would you like to share your socials?
My socials are, I'm at Carla Pineda OCD on Instagram, and I'm at Carla Pineda LPC on TikTok. And I do a lot of educational content around OCD, social anxiety, panic disorder. My website for therapy, if you are in Texas and you're looking for an OCD or an anxiety specialist, my website is layercs.com. And I see people ages 16 and up. Haley, how about your social media?
So I am counseling with Haley on Instagram and TikTok. And as Carla loves to point out, I like to post little boundary phrases and focus a lot on that. There's sometimes just little thoughts that like to run errant from my mind. And occasionally they are about parenting. Occasionally they are about setting boundaries. Occasionally they are about perfectionism. There's a lot there.
That'll be it. And we'll see you all, or we'll see you, or you'll see us, or you'll hear us in the next episode.
That was great. You did a great job.